We're going to finish off our discussion on biases, covering framing bias, sampling bias, measurement bias, and survivorship bias. As always, my goal is to help you avoid common pitfalls and make smarter, more informed bets. Let's start with framing bias. You can frame things in different ways depending how you want it to sound. For example, if I tell you 90 out of 100 people love this new candy, you might think, wow, that's a lot, it must be good. But if I say 10 out of 100 people hated this new candy, you might then think, oh, it must not be that good. Some people really didn't like it. Both statements are saying 90 people gave a positive review and 10 people gave a negative review, but they sound a lot different. One great example of framing is news headlines. On the morning of Saddam Hussein's capture, stock prices fell. One headline said, "Stock prices fall. Hussein's capture may not stop the threat of terrorism." Less than an hour later, stocks rose, and another headline said, "Stock prices rise. Hussein's capture boosts the appeal of risky assets." The takeaway here is that probably neither headline was right. Explaining how one thing, his capture, affected stock prices with two totally opposite statements really doesn't explain it at all. Events don't necessarily need to have a cause. Sometimes things like stock prices are just random. Sports are the same way. Sometimes things happen that are truly random. Think about how close a lot of games are. Random events like fumbles, referee decisions, and injuries can be the difference between a win and a loss. And that is really just due to chance. Okay, next, let's talk about sampling or selection bias. So this happens when the data used to make a decision doesn't necessarily represent the whole situation. Imagine you're looking at a player's last 5 games to decide if they're a good bet, but those games were only against very weak defenders. This sample isn't representative of the player's overall performance and could mislead you into overestimating how well they're going to play in the next game. This comes up all the time in stats. You need to recognize patterns quickly, but also have enough games in your sample to avoid too much noise. We'll talk about this a lot more in analytics too, but for now, just know that the sample of data you choose should be good at representing the thing you're estimating. Next up, we have measurement bias. So measurement bias happens when the data collected isn't accurate because of the way it was collected. It can happen a lot of different ways, but some examples include pulling data from the wrong year, pulling data from the wrong team, or using the wrong equation in a calculation. Regularly checking your data through alternative methods can help make sure you avoid big errors like this. So this is counteracted pretty well through double checking. Okay, last one, survivorship bias. Okay, this is a sneaky one where we focus only on winners or successes and ignore the ones who didn't make it. For example, if you analyze the stats from all the teams who made the NCAA tournament last year, these are on average going to be better than the teams who didn't make the tournament. So you can't pull their stats and then apply them to every team in Division I basketball. This can also be looked at as a type of sampling bias. Okay, let's recap. Framing bias is about how we view information based on how it's presented to us. Sampling bias involves pulling data that does not represent the larger population very well. Measurement bias comes from inaccurate data collection. Survivorship bias comes from focusing on only successful outcomes. I'll say it again. These biases can affect anyone, and the best way to fight them is to recognize when and how they might be influencing your decisions. This is where an objective, structured system like modeling can come in handy. That is everything you need to know about biases.